Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream that covers all things related to digital transformations. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world through their digital transformation journeys. And today's topic that we're going to cover today is called Leading Change and Transformation at a Large Logistics and Transportation Company. And I'm going to let our guest describe herself and her role at that company here in just a moment. But the real topic here today is around change management, how to lead change and how to lead business transformations, whether it's part of a broad business transformation or part of a digital transformation or ERP project, whatever the changes that you're going through. Our intent here is to learn some lessons here and discuss some lessons from those sorts of initiatives here today. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment, but before I do, I talked about who I was. I talked about how this is a weekly live stream we do. This is actually part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast too. So what we do is we take this live interview that you're all part of here today. We'll edit it. We'll add some additional content, make it part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast, a full proper episode that comes out in about 3 weeks from today. That episode will be out featuring this interview. So thanks for being part of the live production here today. And then lastly, we're going to I have some questions to get us started, but I'd love to hear the audience questions too as it relates to this topic. So any questions you have along the way, please drop those in the chat. We're monitoring the stream here, whichever platform you're on here today, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, or X, whatever it's called today. We'll be on streaming it to all those platforms. So please feel free to drop your chats here or your questions here in the chat. And speaking of the chat, right before we get started, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from here today. We tend to draw a multinational audience here. And in fact, my guest here and I are on 2 different continents here today. So love to hear where everyone here is joining from today. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from. Love to see where everyone's joining from here today. And you can continue to use that chat to ask additional questions as we get started here today. So again, leading change and transformation at a large transportation and logistics company. Today's guest to help us unpack this topic is Chilla Batori. So Chilla, thanks for being here today.
Hi, Eric. It's great to be here on the show.
Yeah, appreciate having you first time here, and I appreciate you being here today. Tell us a little about yourself and sort of what your current role is and how you grew up in the whole transformation space here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you. So I was born in Ukraine, and I myself kind of traveled through continents. I currently work in Amsterdam, and I work for this big global transportation and logistics company. But my journey started back as an American studies major, having completed a few scholarships in the U.S., and then having started to work for GE. Who were on their outsourcing journey and were looking at Central Eastern Europe as the target destination for outsourcing a lot of back office processes. So thanks to that, I entered the world of work and the corporate environment, and I grew up through the ranks. I managed a few teams. I was in charge of continuous improvement. I was a process engineer for a while. Then I swapped over to an oil company. And I became a business account manager, a liaison between the shared service center, so the outsource provider, and the business. And then I met change management about 10 years ago, and I fell in love. So here I am 10 years later, working for a completely different industry again, but always kind of against the backdrop of process optimization and outsourcing. I know these are 4-letter words for some, and I know the world of outsourcing is changing a lot too. Think about automation and standardization instead of just shipping processes over. So I really enjoyed the journey, and I am here today as one of the amazing moments of this journey.
That's great. So you mentioned that I think you said you met or you sort of stumbled into change management. How did you make that shift and why?
Well, I think this is a great question. I don't think we rehearsed this one.
No, this is the one I already asked you.
Yeah, I think just working with people kind of makes you really sensitizes you to change. And when I was working as a business account manager, I was constantly in the middle. I was this liaison between what the business, what our kind of the people who paid our bills wanted, and the outsource teams who were often they didn't understand what was happening, why things were happening the way. No one really explained the case for change to them. There was a lot of, very little of what's in it for me. So as a business account manager, I think I already was acting as a change manager, trying to translate a lot of this to the language that made sense to the people on the ground who were in the back office executing the processes. And then I worked a lot with communication teams, so they made me appreciate, choosing the right words, communicating at the right time, using the right channels, because change and communication go hand in hand. Then came and asked to go to South Africa for a month to work in one of our centers and to support the center lead there. And my whole life changed, and I came back as a change manager afterwards.
Interesting. So you were asked to do it, and you fell in love with it, and continue to do it to this day.
Exactly. I don't think you can drive me away with a stick. I think this is my passion, and I love learning about it, reading about it. I follow a lot of channels. I'm ProSci certified. So I think whatever they're doing there is amazing. Check out the latest AI assistants. Yeah, I think I just found my calling.
Yeah, that's great. Well, good to have you here today. Looking forward to learning from some of your experiences here, and want to turn to the audience here real quickly and thank those that are joining from multiple countries here today. Our guest here today, Chilla, mentioned that she's in Hungary from Amsterdam, or works in Amsterdam. I'm in Denver, Colorado in the US, and I also want to say hello to Lena, who's joining from Barcelona. She works at Infor as a BDR. Thanks to Antoine from Montreal. Thanks to Darian for joining from Denver, and Thomas from Germany. So thanks for being here today. And Fethi says hello, although you didn't say where you're from, Fethi, but thank you for joining wherever you are here today. And any questions you have along the way too, please drop those in the chat, and I'll get to those as we dive into the conversation and get further into it here today. But just to get started, I suppose, could you tell us a little bit about maybe a sort of a case study of the project you're working on now, and sort of initiatives you've been working on in recent years? Maybe just give us a little case study, if you don't mind, of case study of change and sort of what your experience has been in the current environment you're working in.
Yeah. So let me start maybe with the past, because it also describes how change management is evolving, or the kind of projects that I think we tend to work on increasingly. So when I started 10 years ago, it was a lot of outsourcing or insourcing or captive and shared and services. So a lot of that, where are we going to put the work? Instead of maybe the core business, which really should be focusing on strategy and being in touch with customers, instead of typing up those invoices. So a lot of the change projects I used to support at that time were sitting down with teams who were transitioning work from one place to another, and then working through the people aspects of that. Because again, maybe let's just stop for a moment and just say, what kind of change management do I do? So I don't do IT change management. I do people change management. So in what I do, I work with people from getting them from the current state to the desired state in a way that's a collaborative effort that brings their creativity to the table. And throughout this process, we speak to them in a language they understand. We're not condescending, and we're co-creating change if we can in most of the cases. So you can't really co-create change with people who are losing their jobs, can you? Right? So that's the kind of old, transition-related change management. There's a lot of emotion there. There's feelings, usually not very positive. And even if you're at the receiving end of change, because you are sitting in a lower cost country, and I think the emphasis is on lower, because it's such a transient thing, right? Who is lower cost? Nobody wants to be a low cost country, I think, anymore, a low cost resource. But that's just the reality of things. Even when you're at the receiving end of change, it's hard. You get a lot of emotion, you get a lot of, resentment, you get a lot of resistance. So a lot of that change is working through, how are you feeling? Why, what happened to you this week? Who didn't want to work with you this week? Who didn't show up this week? Who's showing signs of passive aggressive or outright aggressive behavior with you, instead of agreeing to transition the knowledge to you, which is why we're here for, and this is how we make the company successful in the long term. This was the past, and 10 years ago, and I know a lot of companies are still doing this. However, I think what's really much more exciting is the future, or some of the projects that I'm now involved in, and these are. And it's never one project. I loved your question, how you said, "What's the current project you're working on?" I wish it was one.
Right.
There's always multiple projects. So the project I'm working on at the moment, there's a whole department which we're changing, and we're changing the organization, changing the operating model, we're changing the interactions, we're changing the roles and responsibilities, everything. Where we're putting, just everything is upside down. Because some of the old ways of working, or some of the assumptions we started out with, it started out as a nice outsourcing project, but we had to adjust, I think, to the realities, and we need to be much more we need to be really close to the customer now. We need to listen more to the customer, even though I work in finance, so we're just back office, right? But we can't just be back office. Back office should always also be doing what works best for the customer. Issue that invoice, which is easiest to pay, right? So you never have to get the call with with the inquiry, where is this, or where is that, or how do I pay you? So everything is about the customer now. Speed, removing the voice transaction to the extent possible, right? Making it really seamless, really frictionless, a one click for the customer to pay that invoice, to resolve that dispute for us. These are the kind of projects I'm working on nowadays, as well as automation. Of course, that's the really exciting new realm that we're moving into. But yeah, more about that, I think, later on in the show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about the customer experience and how something as simple or something that seems unrelated to a customer experience, like how a customer pays their invoice, that can have an impact on the overall customer experience and your brand. And so there's so many things that we do in our change and transformation disciplines that would affect that. I would imagine we'll come back to that as well.
Mhm.
Well, very good. So so in all these years of experience, all these different projects, I understand, at no one time is it just one change project that's happening. Usually it's a broader set of changes, or a series of changes, and a series of projects that are happening all at once. But just in general, if you look back on all the change initiatives you've been involved with over the years, what are some of the things, or some of the tips or best practices you've learned to be most critical or most important in change initiatives?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm going to sound really and say the obvious here, but not overestimating your role as a change manager. So, and then let me explain kind of what I mean. So I'm an extremely, well, I consider myself a rather proactive person, and I like to roll my sleeves up, and I like to do stuff when I don't see maybe everyone jumping to the task immediately. And I learned the hard way that I'm not the person people want to hear from. So if anyone knows the Braside methodology, they have this amazing graph which says, who do people want to hear messages from, and what kind of messages do they want to hear from whom? So it's the executives that they want to hear the why are we doing this? What's the business context? What happens if we don't do it now? And then the second most credible speaker is the line manager. The change manager is nowhere on this list, or with the little teeny tiny graph that no one looks at the bottom. So this was a bit of an aha moment for me, because I used to be a direct manager, and I used to be like, yeah, telling people what it is and sending a bunch of emails to, big distribution lists. No. That, the people are so selective in their attention nowadays. They will read the email from their managing director and from the vice president and maybe their line manager, because they can, they still do the performance reviews together. Everybody else's emails go to a different, ranking in that pile. So that's one very big learning for me, that I need to go back to my business account management practice. I am a liaison. I make things happen. I help the sponsors, so the executives, for instance, understand that if they remain quiet, things are not really going to happen, because you don't really see the leadership really paying attention. So why should I, right? That's again completely normal. Um, and maybe another best practice. I don't know best, and I shouldn't have to know best. Again, I'm a change manager, so I connect people, and there are people who always know better. We just need to find these people. Now, sometimes these people are really positive and very, very vocal, and they're exactly the kind of change champions that a change manager needs, right? People enthusiastic, driving the change together, thinking ahead, proactively together. And then there are those people who are negative. They're very vocal, but they're very knowledgeable at the same time. So I guess finding these people and learning to work with them is another kind of very big skill and a very kind of useful best practice that I'd recommend everyone. I just call them my influencers. And sometimes your influencers are teaching you good things, and sometimes they're spreading messages that are just not right. But you gotta find them because they drive so much sentiment that if you are just communicating through the formal channels and they're kind of in the through the informal channels, you'll fail because you're working against each other. So find them, make one team, and then make sure that the official messages get cascaded, but using the people that are really trusted speakers.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And if the influencers don't communicate, which you mentioned, sometimes they communicate the wrong things, and then you have to come in and clean it up. What's oftentimes even worse is when they communicate nothing and people create their own answers. So it's really, I agree with you. It's important to get the messaging from the right people, from the credible sources, from people that people trust and respect within the organization, for sure. And unfortunately, people like you and I, the outside change consultants, aren't nearly as credible as an internal person. Good deal. So just a couple comments here I want to turn to from the audience. A few comments in YouTube on particular. This is from Scott. Scott says, Scott and Reno here, great point on who people listen to. If the message is not coming from their direct chain of command, then forget about it. So great point there. I think we're both in agreement there. If it doesn't come through someone with authority and credibility and leadership within the organization, it's not going to be well received, or not as well received, for sure. Here's a question from, pull it up here if I can. There it is. From Antoine on YouTube. Antoine says, how to manage change for people that will receive a negative impact from a project. I believe it's utopian to believe that all change is positive for everyone. And you even mentioned, Chilla, like, back in the day, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, some of the projects you worked with involved people's jobs being eliminated. And that's a lot harder change to swallow. But how do you manage those negative impacts, or those things that maybe aren't, great for you or I, but they might be great for the rest of the organization? How do you manage those changes?
Yeah, I have a one word or two word answer: with honesty. So, Anton, I think this is a great question. And I think this is, sometimes I get this question, what do you do? I'm a change manager. You make people do stuff they don't want to do, right? So this is, I think, a bad rep for change management, or bad rep for maybe bad change managers, if I'm very honest. I like to say tough things, and I like people to talk about what hurts instead of painting this rosy picture of something that's not. What's in it for me, right, is a very, very important part of understanding your audience. And if you don't take their perspective, if you are only towing the party line and you're saying, this is so great for the company because we're going to save 400 million zillion dollars. I'm sorry, who cares if I, as the individual, lose my job, or all my colleagues are leaving? The whole department is something else from tomorrow. We all experience change on our own our own level, individual level. So even if the change is great for you, you can still be unhappy about it, because let's say you've got so many things going on in your life that you just have no capacity to take or to absorb yet another change. So I think being honest about it, if it's not a good change, if it's really just cutting costs, which unfortunately every company has to do, then just say it. And we always do these things, right, as a corporation, to stay successful on the long term. We have a responsibility to our shareholders. It's short-term cuts may actually help a company restructure for the future and for success, but not all change is positive by any means. And whomever suggests this, I think, is a utopian dreamer / not a very good change manager, and feel free to challenge them.
Yeah, you don't want to oversell it or be overly positive or overly optimistic about the changes. And a lot of times I think of people like salespeople. If you're going through a broader transformation or broader automation project, a lot of times salespeople end up having to um, do more work. Now they're being asked to track more steps in the pipeline or more information in the CRM system. And for salespeople, just as a broad stereotype, they don't want to do that, largely because they don't make money from doing that. Perception, I make more commission when I'm selling, not when I'm entering stuff in the back office system. But so you have to kind of acknowledge that in that case, and then sell them on the fact that actually here's how it's going to help the broader organization. And it actually might help you sell more. And here's how it might help you sell more by, this new automation rolling out, this new tool, whatever it might be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sales are such a peculiar group of people, right? We all we are in finance, right? So they are our biggest stakeholder in a way, and we don't like them sometimes because they really bring the tough messages.
Right.
They're the ones who the customer calls screaming, and they're the ones who need to do the extra admin, and so we think of them as people in nice suits going out for fancy drinks. Whereas we in the back office, we were supposed to save that extra $5, but they, I think it's really worth listening to them. So one of the changes, that can really help a back office organization is to bring in the voice of sales, the voice of customer through sales into transformation conversations, into process improvement, even into reworks, if you will, because they really bring that direct insight from what hurts or pleases the customer.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Scott has another comment here on YouTube. Scott says that followed up by an even better point regarding the influencers. I see not enough time on the front end working on this issue. Maybe I'll turn that into a question though for Chilla. How do you, when you go into an organization and you're just starting out, you're being brought in to help lead the change or help be part of the change. You don't necessarily know who all the formal and informal political influencers are within an organization. So how do you identify who those most important influencers are within an organization, and when do you do that?
Yeah, the $1 million question, right? And then how do I make them actually join me and and abandon a lot of other things they're doing? So I think there are people in every organization who are really visible and they're involved in a lot of things, right? So I think you just have to kind of have a feel for the place, and they'll find you, they'll come your way because they're genuinely interested. Even if no one's asked them to support this project, they'll be coming to you and they'll be giving you feedback and they'll be telling you what you're doing wrong. So that's one thing, how you can find them. The other thing is, yes, going through management and having people volunteer, whatever is the right verb, to join your project. That's not always successful. And sometimes we start with one set of people and then we end up with another. People may understand that their availability is different than we had expected, or the project needs are different than we had expected. And people come and go. I think what I like to do is keep kind of the demand on the team rather flexible, because if I tell anyone, okay, you need to be with me on this project for the next 1 year and it's 4 hours per week, I'll never find anyone to join me. So I think as the volume of work fluctuates, and as in any good project, the planning stage of the project should have most of the work, right? Not, you can then monitor execution, you can choose to do course correction, but if we put in the effort into that starting phase, and then if you have a good PMO office where not all the projects start on the 1st of January, then you can plan your resources better and identify those influencers naturally, or by going to the leadership team, or just ask what people are currently working on. I think what I find very powerful is that if I find people who are already working on the same problem or have been trying to solve my same problem, their willingness to join my project and be my influencers will be just much higher.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I agree. That's a great way to build that ownership and support, within the organization. Here's a question that is directed to me, but I'm going to ask you the question too, Chilla. This is from Antoine on YouTube as well. Antoine says, this is a question for Eric. How can an external partner be able to act as a change agent during a project I believe the company must always have a change agent, but that's not always the case. So, in your experience, Chilla, even though I'm going to deflect the question and give it to you, I'll pass on it and give it to you. But how do you manage that outside expertise that is required to manage change, but also the internal knowledge of the operations and the people in the organization, the culture, all that stuff? How do you end up marrying those two skill sets, and how have you seen it work best?
My first answer was going to be with difficulty. I think change agent and external change agent is an oxymoron for me. I think change agent, being an agent of change, an ambassador, whatever you want to call us, it implies an understanding of the context, of the stakeholders, of the channels, of the ways of working. Yes, this can be in the way. So actually, what I think could work better is if you really have to work with external teams, because sometimes you don't get, there's no people approved, to be hired as change agents, or there's just never a budget. Then you go with an external person, but I'd rather they design the strategy for me and propose a plan and a set of activities, but where I actually want the how to be validated in-house. I just can't, I mean, unless it's a company who has been working with you forever and ever, and they actually know better how you work than yourself. I've also seen this before. So I think with that asterisk, yes, an external change agent can be an effective change agent, but I'd rather someone designs the theory, proposes it, and then I contextualize it with an internal network of agents, and we execute in-house.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of getting the best of both worlds and combining the skill sets of multiple resources to build a complete and a comprehensive change team. Good stuff. So what about, I want to shift gears a little bit, or sort of go take this a different direction here. This question is from Darian on LinkedIn, and Darian says, "What lessons have you learned from cross-cultural or international teams?" I know you mentioned that you've worked internationally, or you've managed or been involved with change that affects multinational teams. How are multinational change initiatives different, and what are some of the strategies you've seen work best in those multinational situations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so everything's more complex when you work with teams across the world, right? We can agree on this, but everything's also much more interesting and rich. So let me kind of tell a story about how I learned the value of, when I don't speak, for instance. So you can see how I am. I talk a lot. I'm an extrovert. I talk over people. Huge improvement areas forever and ever. But there was a time I was going to Kuala Lumpur, and I was the business account manager for a new account that we onboarded, and we had a large team there, and I needed to go there, and I needed to train the team on something, because surprise, surprise, as change managers, we also take care of change and trainings on process, less on process, but more on systems, ways of working, and operating models. And I arrived in KL, Kuala Lumpur, and I had this massive throat ache, and I just couldn't talk. So if I guess, it's a cliche, but my colleagues in Kuala Lumpur were much more polite than I was. And because I couldn't speak, they finally did. So that was a breakthrough point for me on this account when I arrived, and I just said, sorry. And they were like, okay, so now we tell you how things are. And I guess this taught me such a big lesson about listening, and not assuming, and not just rushing in and talking over people when they're maybe more quiet, or sometimes people need to be called upon in a lot of cultures, and then they'll just say the most amazing, the smartest thing, or the thing that will break your project that you would have otherwise completely ignored because you're like just doing this and rushing through your agenda.
Right.
So I think the power of listening is what I learned through my cross-cultural interactions, and the power of asking people, okay, this is kind of my view from where I am. what am I not seeing? Because I think too often we ask closed questions and we just say, okay, is everyone in agreement? And then
Yeah.
you kind of immediately move on to the yes, sure, close the meeting, I issue the minutes. And people are unable to articulate what they really think about it. You never give them the permission if you're from a certain culture, which prizes, loud and, out there kind of people and extroverts in particular. So and also maybe it's not a cross-cultural thing. It's more extroversion, introversion spectrum. If you're working in a team with introverts, please don't ask them to immediately give you feedback on stuff.
Mm.
Like leave them alone. Give them time to process. And then they'll go away, and the way they work best, they'll come back with a list of things. Again, you never would have thought of, would have completely gone under the radar. But give them space. Don't force them into immediate reactions and responses. So, yeah, I hope this answers the cross cultural, international, or question.
Yeah, I mean that's a great unpacking of that topic. I mean, you talk about introversion versus extroversion, and it's funny that you say that because I was thinking before you said it, I'm a complete introvert, so I'm pretty far on the introvert spectrum side of things. So I do exactly what you said. I don't respond right away. I don't have an opinion. I don't have a response right away because I have to think about it, and I'm not going to verbalize it while I'm thinking about it. And so there's that, if you figure it's about 50-50, half of an organization is probably extroverted, the other half is probably pretty introverted. You've got to make sure you're speaking both languages. And also too, you look at different cultures. Different cultures are more accepting of someone speaking up or more accepting of someone stating a concern in an open forum or not, or a one-on-one forum. Other cultures, it's not as comfortable because it's more hierarchical, and that's just not the culture of either the country you're operating in, or it could be the culture of the organization too.
Exactly.
So, how do you what are some ways that you've seen not just the introversion versus extroversion side of it, but just different cultures in general? How do you navigate all those variations in a multinational change initiative?
Yeah, so I taught myself a bit about the theory. So I really like the Hofstede model of cultures, and then there's national cultures and then work cultures. But I think the national cultures model is really kind of what I often go to. And it's a great icebreaker as well. I used to do this with my team before we went into a transition. So good old days, no, neither. And then we would say, okay, let's compare the culture, that you represent and the one that, we're transitioning from and to, and then let's see like the biggest differences on the scales on those histograms, and then what does this tell us? What kind of conflicts can we expect? Yeah, and how can we prepare? Like maybe like not like the Navy SEALs, but still prepare, visualize the kind of conflicts we may have because we're just wired differently, and then adds the personal differences on top of that. So yeah, education. There's a book I love. It's the Culture Map from Erin Meyer. I just I can read this book like 5 times a day and just look up a situation. So recently with my team, we looked at decisions with a capital D and with a small d. Right. So there's like these two ways of making decisions, and they don't even align with like the usual stereotypes about, Americans. No, they make decisions with a small d. I would have never thought, a culture which is quite straightforward and, often imposes decisions on its members. People make decisions, but very quickly, retract, and then they make another decision. Whereas you have Germany and Japan, which are very consultative societies or nations, and they'll not make a decision until every one of the members had agreed on it, but then they stick to it. They really religiously stick to it. So again, if you read up a bit about these things, and if you follow a couple of voices on the social media platforms, you'll just learn, even if you're not exposed daily, or you don't have to learn from your own mistakes. That's what I'm trying to say. But also learn from your mistakes. It's fine. I think it's fine. I was not born like this. I was lucky to study in the US when I was in junior high. But, did I know everything about US culture? No. And I will never know everything about it. So yeah, I think this is lifelong learning about cultures.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, one of the best ways to deal with, some of the multinational or just understanding change in general is to ask and listen. You're talking about just the need to ask questions and understand,
Mm,
listen, empathize, all that stuff. And it's even more
mm,
important in multinational situations because, for example, as an American, a super, if I'm working with a super hierarchical sort of a culture, where people don't speak out or share their opinions, to me, it doesn't make sense because in America, that's what we do. We speak up all the time, even if we shouldn't.
mm.
We speak up too much, we argue. So why is this culture over here not doing that? And so you have to really understand that it's not like it doesn't mean it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just different. And so listening and understanding and really unpacking and dissecting different cultures, I think is
Mm.
important.
Yeah, and I think why is it so important to put this effort in there is because your change is never going to succeed if you just follow your own cultural norm, and decisions will be reversed. People will leave the room and do something completely different. The conversation after the meeting, is the meeting after the meeting is a very dangerous thing, because that's when people can just come out and say, "I completely disagree with everything that's been said." And then if you have a not a very professional leader who likes to agree with their team, for instance, to gain some sympathy in a difficult situation, then your whole initiative is just been boycotted. So, indeed, a lot of teams will not speak up. So have the meeting after the meeting or the meeting before the meeting. I think that's even better because then you can prepare for the ambience, you can prepare for the questions, and you can proactively put those questions in the room on behalf of the more quiet participants. That also works.
Yeah, yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, I like it. Now here's an interesting question from Scott on YouTube. Scott says, "How do you, as a change manager, push forward on a project you may not be able to fully support, but the direction is coming from the top to do the project?" And you just sort of alluded to this a minute ago. About sometimes people aren't on board necessarily, and how do you get them on board? We were talking about that, but what do you do when you yourself, or you may not be fully commit or fully excited about the change yourself? So how do you manage change management for the change management person? How do you manage?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have like, I don't know if I have an answer for you. I think what's important about change. Yeah, I read recently that we should stop talking about the theory of change and the emotions that we go through and the change curve because nobody cares. But I still think it's something that's worth knowing. Change is like grief, right? So the first person who we always refer to when we kind of try to explain what change management is about, well, the first person is a saber-toothed tiger who's chasing you, and then you produce the fight, flight, or freeze response. But if we move a bit further in history, there was this person called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she studied grief. And then the stages of grief that she described, they're exactly the stages of change. You don't start loving the change. You don't start by embracing it. You have to go through a lot of other steps before you could get to the phase where you yourself can start rationalizing and finding the positive. And sometimes there is no positive. So sometimes you just find okay, let's just do this, guys, and like finish it and move on to the next better project, maybe. So, let's face it, this change, how I do change management is not for myself, right, at home, but I do it for work. So not every change project is going to be your favorite, but this is what we tell to the managers and so the change managers as well as the people managers. Try to get through your change curve first. You can't help people if you yourself are conflicted about the change, because then the whole kind of the body, everything will be obviously wrong or in dissonance with your messages. Yeah, you say that this is good, and then you have this really sour face, or you never show up for meetings for 2 weeks because you're I don't know, struggling, but use whatever word you want for it. So again, be honest with yourself, and try to get through your own trough first before you could help others. The analogy is always of the mask on the airplane. You can't help infants, others before you help yourself. So get that mask first. Figure out how you feel about it, let go if you can, right? Make that decision to move ahead. And I really like this thing about change. I really strongly believe that it's a decision. You make a decision to move on with the change.
Mm.
And if you want to keep on looking backwards, you'll never move on. You'll never be successful. You'll never find that new beginning. And there are a lot of people who like go looking back. They love to live in the past. But, there has to be a point when you decide to let go. And then your brain and your mental capacity and everything will be available to creatively plan that change for your people. So this would be my very long-winded answer to a very complex question, actually. So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
yeah, it's very complex. I mean, that's a great summarization of what is a very complex thing there. And this is just a follow-up comment from Sterling on YouTube. Sterling says precisely there are dangers of both being too agreeable and needing validation from senior stakeholders all the time. So that was sort of a follow-up from an earlier point you had made there. Um, and then here's a comment from William from YouTube as well. William says people who are negative and vocal are easier to work with. The
Mhm.
negative people who are pleasant but whisper dissent can be tough if they have the ear of leadership.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting point. It's not really the introvert extrovert thing. It's just or it could be. I mean, it could be partially because someone's introverted and therefore they're not going to be as vocal, and it's the change resistance or the negativity isn't as easy to spot because it's someone that perhaps is introverted or they're just not as vocal. But in general, how do you deal with negativity just in general? I mean,
Mhm.
whether it's someone that's vocal about it or not, how do you overcome that in a change initiative you've been involved with?
Yeah. Yeah, we often say people are going to naturally resist change. I don't really believe in this. And so I think when changes are explained and people are treated with respect, even bad changes will be accepted. Eventually, somehow, blah, blah, blah. Use adjective of your choice. Um, I think what's more interesting about resistance, and again, I constantly, because I always follow them and I love what they do. Prasa has this wonderful article about the root causes of resistance, and that it's not as simple as people resist change just because they're lazy or there's so many reasons why people resist. Can you please take time to explore, and you might find actually very valid reasons why they resist change. You may have completely missed something. So I don't like this statement, and I don't accept it that resistance is normal and everyone's like negative. Now, how to deal with negative people? Again, often I found that just listening to people, sitting down and giving them the space to ventilate, I'm not going to say moan, but ventilate and express themselves is all they need. Because then again, talk about respect, they feel heard. They understand everyone's an adult. They understand most of the time that we're not going to change the corporate strategy because they don't like it. But they have been given the opportunity to say that they don't like it and it doesn't work for them. And we're going to say, yeah, I hear you. It doesn't work for everyone. Um, I still want to go back a little bit to the silent, to the whisperer.
Yeah, yeah. Quiet person
Question.
that's behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Resisting change.
exactly. Because these are the real subvertive elements.
Harder to
So
find.
exactly, really hard to find. And as a change manager, you're not often that close to the people, to the department. Sometimes you're thrown in. Some change management and transformation departments work as internal consultants, so you just get assigned whatever project you need to work on, and then reassign. So this is where I would say the responsibility of the leaders comes into play.
Yeah.
A leader themselves should identify people who are doing this subversive whispering. And if they find that it's not just the desire to be heard, right? That respect thing that we spoke about, that they should put an end to this. They should put an end to this. You can't be everywhere as a change manager. And this is why when I mentioned that sponsors, so the executives have a really different set of responsibilities in terms of, what messages they need to articulate, what their role is in the change. They have to be there and they have to be visible. They need to sponsor the change, articulate why it's good for the company, but they also have to put an end to this kind of subversive behaviors, which on the long term hurt the department. So when I have my conversation with the sponsors on what I want them to do over the next few weeks, besides setting up a town hall and supporting me with some opening and closing remarks on one of the sessions that I organize, I also ask them, about rumors. I ask them about the mood. I ask, and when they say everything's fine, then sorry, but I bring in the bad news if I have heard otherwise. So I think, and they really appreciate it. So imagine the leader who is in an ivory tower and no one dares to tell them the truth or the real sentiment. Again, imagine you're not in the US and this is not in your culture. The leader, if they're open and interested, they really will appreciate this. So find the right words, find the right tone, but do bring those messages and then help have the leader take that step and fulfill their leadership role.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I mean, I like it. It's good general advice that can apply in a lot of different situations. Another question from Sterling on YouTube here, which I love this question. Would excessive agility impede an organization's change management in the long run? Could a little rigidity in the business strategy perhaps facilitate change if possible? And maybe I'll ask maybe a follow-up or sort of a part two of that question, or that sort of maybe another example of how sometimes flexibility and nimbleness of an organization can actually work against you. A lot of times when we're helping clients implement really flexible technologies that can do, a simple process a million different ways, depending on how you want it, a lot of times that becomes an excuse to resist change because now I have a tool that just allows me to do the way things I've always done things. And so maybe I'm a little bit more resistant to change because now I have a tool it's a modern tool, but it's sort of reverting back to old ways of doing things. Mm-hmm. So that's another, maybe example that we see a lot of times that organizations that have that sort of flexibility with the tools or the process changes they're going through, or the fact that we're a decentralized organization. I'm giving you a bunch of examples here, but just in general, does that flexibility versus rigidity work against you or for you, or how do you manage that, or how do you see change working differently in those two different extremes?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, when I first read the question, I was thinking, what do you mean by agility? Do you mean we're changing our priorities all the time? And we have no idea, what our strategy is, and we're just, figuring it out on the go. So, but let's not assume that that's the case, right? So I think most of the time, this is how it comes across to a lot of people. And so I hear this all the time from the people on the ground. Where are we going? I mean, I can't believe that we're doing something else again, or you're piling on, onto my existing very long list of priorities, and you're not letting go of anything. It's just not possible to work this way. So I think there are organizations where things are changing too much and too fast, and people then all of a sudden, I think, just quit mentally, right? Change fatigue is an example that we can just easily refer to. I think what's happening in our world, I mean, imagine, right? Change is cumulative, or the impacts of change on the individual. It's never just the one thing that's happening at work, or those 10 things usually, right? Again, it's never just one project, but your family, everything, politics, the weather. So I think there are organizations that should do less change and should be less agile if agility means we just can't stick with one thing for long enough. And I think people should just talk about it and just say it, guys, come on, yesterday this, tomorrow completely different, or both, or 5 things at the same time. No, we can't do this. Can you please rethink what's the most important thing, or what are the most important 5 things? And those 5 may change, but there really shouldn't be 25. There should be kind of 5-ish, or whatever the right number is, depending on the size of the change. But then I also don't think that without having agility or that nimbleness, you can operate and be successful anymore. You make a business plan and then a rocket hits. I'm from Ukraine, so imagine, some things are really, really close to heart. So then you need to move your whole company to a different country, set up a VAT number, and get certified there to do business. So you can't just go on with the plan you had created X months ago if the macro and micro circumstances change. So I think it's about finding this soft spot. Maybe it doesn't exist, or maybe it's a range of soft spots, and then depending on people's capacity for change, they'll be able to do more or less in that period. But yeah, there's no one simple answer to this extremely complex question.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it is a very complex topic, and we could probably spend the entire hour that we have here today. We could have just spent on that one thing and still not really unpacked it all altogether. But I think in general, a lot of times, a lot of organizations we work with are trying. They're actually trying to become both. They're trying to become more agile as an organization, but they're also trying to standardize. They're trying to act like one company because they've grown through
Mhm. Yeah.
acquisition, they've grown organically and entered new markets and launched new product lines and all these different things that sort of organically go a bunch of different directions. And then, leadership looks up one day and says, wow, we're really inefficient. We're acting like 20 different companies. Why don't we just start acting like one company? And we get
Yeah.
more efficiency, better customer experience, all that stuff. And so a lot of times just that vision and painting the strategy for the organization and how this change initiative supports that. I mean, I think people
Yeah.
in general understand that. I don't think they generally view that as a bad thing if we're,
Mhm.
call it less flexible because now we're not doing things the way we've always done them. Now we're acting like one company and we have more
Mhm.
of a common
Mhm.
operating model. So not
Yeah.
always the case, but some people will resist. But I think in general, that's a way to sell it. I mean, it's a positive thing. You can be honest. You can tie it back to a broader business strategy, and if it makes sense to people why you're doing it, then
Yeah.
usually they're going to come along eventually.
Exactly. And the change, well, the project I'm in at the moment is all about this. So you've mentioned where I work. We've announced a year ago becoming one FedEx. I mean, that's a huge change for the enterprise. And then what does it mean? We're still just discovering it. But I must say, it's a very welcome change because it comes. So I'm based in Europe. I joined a different company, not FedEx, at the time I signed my contract with FedEx because we were acquired or integrated, merged,
Right.
find the right word. We and therefore the company culture, the systems, the ER, everything is different, and it's still different. And I must say, people can't wait
Mm.
to be one FedEx. So in that case, one company, one team, one ERP, one everything, because it is fragmentation is tiring. You can't standardize. You always have to be explaining your exceptions. Oh, then you're labeled difficult. Oh, you're in Europe. Oh, what? So so I think people are in. I'd say if we want to bust a few myths, people don't resist change just for the heck of it. No, people are not lazy. No, people want to do the right thing, and most of us bring our heart to work, and we want to have a purpose. We can execute consistently, without and consistently is the agility kind of how much is too much agility question.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I look at people like this, and when you start with this positive, assume positive intent in all these change conversations, I think it changes the tone, and it says, we thought this, or this is kind of where we need to end up. How do we get there? Let's decide that together. Let's plan that together, and that really then changes the acceptance levels for change management.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense, and I think you have a really good point that you said in there. You had a better choice of words than I'll paraphrase here, but your point about how people have good intentions. I think that's a point that gets lost a lot. I think a lot of times people think, well, if Chilla is resisting this change, she must be a problem, and a lot of times, well, it's because Chilla doesn't understand the change, or no one's explained it to her, and there's an absence
Mhm.
of information, and so it creates a kind of a fear that is unintended, but it percolates and it turns into fear. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times people assume, well, it must be because Chilla is a problem. Well, no, it's just because Chilla doesn't understand. So we help understand. She might not be 100% fully on board with it, but she's going to understand a lot better than if you don't share the information in general. So,
Yeah.
uh,
And one thing, leaders, by the time do they get to the communication point, they've went through their own change curves 10 times over. So they're completely on board. They know everything. They understand all the connection. But then imagine the person, they're hearing about this for the first time. They give them the time. Give them the time to walk their own change curve and take their time and repeat those messages. I don't know. I heard so many ways, 7, 17, how many times, as many times as you have to. But give people the time to understand, and then yeah, they'll resist much less. You're completely correct, Eric.
what about this? This is a sort of an elephant
Mm.
in the room here. This is from
Oh yeah.
Harry on LinkedIn.
Love it.
There is one overwhelming fear of being replaced by AI
Mm.
or change anywhere in the organization. Um,
Hmm.
maybe let's focus on not just necessarily AI, but AI is a good example. Technology oftentimes is perceived as a
Yeah.
risk, and AI, I would argue, is perceived as even more of a risk than technologies of the past. How do you how are you seeing AI and other emerging technologies, automation, all this stuff
Yeah.
that's happening in the market? How do you see that affecting people's ability or willingness to change, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah. Yeah, so how many minutes do I have to answer this question? Because it's a huge one, but really good one. And indeed, it's the elephant in the room these days. I've read a lot of kind of studies and projections about, is AI going to take away all our jobs? And then how many jobs is this? And then every year, basically, or probably every quarter, they revise the estimates, and then they say, no, but if you're in a creative role, your job is safe. Yeah, right. Look at all the stuff that that DALI does and all the amazing visual arts generators. So I think none of us are safe, and I think there's nothing to be afraid of because it's definitely coming. So we might as well prepare. That's kind of my attitude towards it. Approach it with curiosity. That would be another thing I'd say. I'm currently thinking about starting doing a course on human AI integration and the change management implications of that, because I think this is what's coming our way. Um, Most jobs, according to the current research, right? So 2024 and maybe a few months ago, most jobs can't be automated completely. It's tasks that are being automated, right?
Yeah,
And then again, how do you approach what's right to be automated? Ask the people what tasks they hate the most. I mean, again, until now, I think in my experience, we mostly automated all the repetitive and extremely error prone manual tasks that freed up people's capacity to do, to interact with customers, to think. I mean, thinking and time for thinking in our calendars is something I think we've completely forgotten to create space for. Um, I consciously block time in my calendar for learning, for reading, because otherwise, if I only do and work through my to-do list, I'll be brain dead and also extremely demotivated. I mean, there's something for the soul, and so I want to look at AI, and I think a lot of companies are thinking about this. Keep the people, but keep them doing something more meaningful, and ask them, what are those tasks that you can truly automate. I think it's really similar to the dawn of outsourcing. Again, a story. I worked in a team that completely should have never been outsourced. The process that we were doing was it was, oh goodness, I can't even say this. So we were providing support for healthcare machinery breaking down in the UK, scheduling preventative maintenance, as well as sending engineers to fix the machines. And this was at a time when we did not really have a good software for route planning. So I was sending people across London to spaces they were never going to get to hospitals because of traffic, and I had no idea because there was never a software. Which should have told me what's the traffic situation. So that process should have never been outsourced. Again, same thing. Find the opportunities, I think, for AI, for processes that should have never been outsourced and should never be done by a human in 2024 because they're so error prone. But keep the human in there, because if you stop checking the code, if you forget the controls you built in, if the business environment changes and there's no one to translate that for the AI, you have lost control of your process.
mm,
So please don't be afraid of AI. Get
right.
to know
Yeah,
it,
yes.
work with it. But yeah, don't hide, because it is coming, and I think the sooner we can embrace it, the better, and the more educated decisions we can make about what tasks, again, not processes, tasks, we decide to automate.
Yeah, it's an AI can be a great point of leverage and scale for individuals. You can do more work, you can add more value, and it's taking all the great work you've done over the years now, and it's sort of exponentially increasing your effectiveness
Mhm.
and efficiency and allowing you to do more. And so we have yet to see any massive, reduction in force, or any reduction in force for that matter, resulting from AI and even automation in general. We don't see a lot of head cutting like we might have seen 20 years ago in this space.
Yeah.
Although here's a comment from Perry, right as I was saying that. Perry on LinkedIn said Dell laid off their entire HR department just 5 days ago. I hadn't heard that, but to sort of play devil's advocate, I'm saying I haven't seen a lot of technology initiatives result in headcount in recent years, but there are organizations out there that are laying people off, and there is attrition and change that some organizations are going through. But in general, it's usually not because of automation, or it's not because of AI. Although some technology companies I've read are laying off as a result of AI. So as I'm saying that, I'm also contradicting myself at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of change in the world, and you've got to just know how to navigate it and be sensitive to the fact that real and perceived fears out there.
And there are, and I'd ask Dell, what do they call HR? Because business partnering, people development, talent and reward programs post-COVID, in this world where we no longer want to go to the office and we want to work in the countryside and get the same pay as in a big city, these are HR topics. So if this was laid off, then let's check on the Dell share price in a few, or maybe start buying in a few years when it's really low. I don't know. I don't have any affiliation with Dell, and apologies, I'm speaking out of turn here. But admin tasks, approving holiday requests, consolidating data, and then spitting out some analytics along certain parameters, which were again approved by the leadership and are in line with the strategic goals, those you should be able to automate.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And here's a sort of a good capstone question that sort of ties this all together. Everything we've been talking about here today, you've shared a lot of great ideas and experiences with us here today, Chilla. But if we back up for a second and say, well, how do we get started on all this? I mean, we've talked about a lot of stuff. It's hard to boil the ocean. This question's from Darian on LinkedIn, and she asks, what are some tips for teams getting started on their change management initiatives within broader business or digital transformation? So maybe just to narrow that down even more. If I haven't managed change yet, or I know that change management is going to be an issue and I haven't really started my change management initiatives, what are some good ways to get started?
Yeah, I think start wherever way you can. There's no best formula. I think having the realization, acknowledging that change management is not something that project managers do on the side, I think is the first big step. So if you have that in your organization, then I salute you, because that's where it all starts. Where you put the team who will do change, you can put them in HR, you can put them in transformation, you can put them in continuous improvement. Again, I don't think it really matters, as long as it's at least a couple people who know a little bit of theory and then have the people skills to work with the subject matter experts who know, and then they can help again consolidate the strategy, the information of where we need to get to, with the how that comes from these experts. Again, you don't have to have anyone trained on process. I became a change manager, or in the Association of Change Management Professionals. I don't think that the degree is the most important criteria. I think anyone who cares about people, who cares about doing the right thing for the organization, whatever you call it, strategy, the budget, meeting the financial targets, it has to be actually a combination of these things. And then also doing it with the right behaviors can be your first, can be your first change agent. And then if you have a big transformation agenda, eventually I think you will arrive at the conclusion that you do need teams or team members for whom this is not just a hobby, and you also need leadership commitment to this, which is beyond lip service. So I think depending on the maturity of your organization, you can start very small and you can educate yourself with all the resources out there, and then when you scale up, as you scale up, You can choose to hire for it and then train for it, and train across the board, not just your change managers. I think if everyone speaks the same language about change and why it matters, and if they say, you know what, I'm in denial at the moment, so you know what, please don't start kind of telling me all the good things about this change. I'm not there yet, or I just need time for myself. So, you know, eventually, when it becomes a common language for the organization, that's when you reach maturity point. But there's so many ways of getting there.
Yeah, yeah, it's great advice. Those are some good tips to get started on the change journey. And speaking of the change journey, I appreciate you sharing all your experiences with multiple change journeys over the years. And so, thanks for being here today, Chilla. This was a great conversation, and the time flew by. So, I appreciate your time here today, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric. It was my pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions. I really enjoyed participating and sharing my insights. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Yeah, and the audience has great questions. Thank you to everyone who had questions. I hope you found value in this, and we'll release this interview, this live discussion that we just had here today. We'll release it as part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which will be released in 3 weeks from this week. You can find that podcast by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So you can see this and other interviews, other podcast episodes that we've done on that same website, transformationgroundcontrol.com. Again, my name is Eric Kimberling, Third Stage Consulting. We do these live interviews, same time, same place, every Tuesday. So wherever you're joining from today, you can join us again next Tuesday at the same time and place, same topic too, or same general theme, which is digital transformation stuff. So